Alright folks, time for my favorite thing about Disenchantment, the rampant speculation. Last year I threw out a lot of theories in my video about Miri the Mop Girl and her potential future as the ruler of Dreamland, and a lot of what I said in that video came to fruition this year. This year's speculation is, well, a little bit more speculative. They threw so many wrenches into the lore in part 4 that we've got a handful of detours, and I mostly think it's just going to be fun to talk about the possibilities. This video is all about speckles freculation. I mean Freckles Speculation, aka who the heck is Freckles anyways. The video is also going to cover some other mysteries, though not as in-depth as I expected. I might actually do another Disenchantment speculation video after this, so we'll see. Let's dive in. Hey, I also want to remind y'all that I have a Patreon, which is absolutely the best way to support me if you like what I make, and all members of the Patreon get to see most of my videos early, so that's a nice perk. Check it out if you're interested. You ever think about how bad everyone in Disenchantment must smell? I do. Honestly, I wish I could hook them up with today's video sponsor, Scentbird. Scentbird is a really cool subscription service that offers new fragrances every month for just $16 a month. And these aren't just samples either, it's a generous amount. Check it out. I don't know much about perfume, but I do know that it is expensive. And being able to take a scent for a test drive without dropping hundreds of dollars on a bottle is hugely beneficial. In fact, I was talking to my good friend Offbeat Kiki about this very company, and they said, quote, "It's like impossible to buy perfumes on the internet without going in blind." And I said, Keeks, that is exactly why this service is so great. And these are actual top designer brand scents. You'll find Prada, Gucci, Versace, and more. They'll even help match your personal taste with scents based on your preferences and previous purchases. It makes too much sense. They sent me 3 vials, Confessions of a Rebel Morning After, Florist London German Street, and my personal fave, now pardon as I butcher this French, Brioni the New Eau de Parfum Intense. Nailed it. It's got a really nice fruity vibe and it made my nose feel good. If you're tired of half-empty perfume bottles lying around, Scentbird can help. You'll save hundreds trying out brands before committing to a full bottle. Make sure to use my coupon code for 55% off. It will only be $7 for your first month. Scentbird! Alright, so let's go over the real basics for this speculation. Freckles was introduced in part 3 in a very suspicious scene, but his very first appearance in the show was actually the very first episode. See, right there. Pretty creepy. In part 3, Freckles was used by Zog as a means of communicating through his madness.
Zog was left for dead with a hole in his chest. He was told his loving daughter was burnt at the stake.
But this piece of graffiti written in Disenchantment's ancient language actually hinted there was more to him all along. Freckles was here. And sure enough, in part 4 it was revealed that Freckles was sentient the entire time, and is in fact trying to manipulate aspects of Dreamland's leadership with some help from Cloyd and Becky. But the real questions are raised with this revelation, when we see that Cloyd and Becky themselves can inhabit the bodies of other dummies/dolls from this shop. This begs the question, who is inhabiting Freckles' body? Well, to best determine that, I think we need to dive into what we know about Freckles and his motivations so far. Knowing that Freckles is working with and is seemingly in charge of Cloyd and Becky means that their motivations are likely one and the same. And I think this checks out. In part 4, episode 4, Goon Baby Goon, when the crew confronts Cloyd and Becky, Cloyd immediately blurts out their motivations.
And her know all about your secret plan.
The plan to find the magic and steal it?
Cloyd!
And this also lines up with how Freckles, Cloyd, and Becky maneuver in the next episode. Freckles infiltrates an elf meeting and learns that they seek control of the castle so that they can use the goo that lies underneath. Freckles immediately aims to separate Zog and Bean, seemingly so it will be easier for them to locate the goo underneath the castle.
Now to separate Zog and Beanie. I'll invade their dreams like a goddamn genie.
After learning about the statue in the town square, which I'm still not certain how Freckles knew there would be a secret passage here, but anyways, he, Cloyd, and Becky search underneath the castle through the elven ruins, which I believe is them searching for the goo, or magic, as Cloyd let slip earlier.
Nothing but gold coins. Keep looking.
Obviously, they aren't able to find it yet, but after Freckles fails to kill Zog at the end of this one, he continues to try and separate him from Dreamland. We can actually see him spying on Zog in part 4, episode 7 in the background here as Zog leaves the castle. See him? Next, he befriends Derek and Jasper, convincing them to beat up these bully elves, tricking them into believing they killed one of the elves, and then pressing them to leave town to avoid the consequences. They then leave a note for Zog, which I assume Freckles knew would drive Zog out of Dreamland in search for his kids. Of course, he definitely didn't expect to be captured by the Carnival Freak Show himself, which seemed to mess with his plans a little bit. But the next question is, does Freckles want the secret goo simply because he's working with Dagmar, Cloyd, and Becky, or does he have his own motivations to get this this goo? Well, I guess we need to try and figure out what the heck the goo even does, don't we? The only real verbalized hint is what this trog says.
No, you fool. It's not what you want. It's what you deserve.
So this is still pretty vague, but it does imply that the goo doesn't grant people their desires, but rather grants them what they actually deserve most, which theoretically means the goo could be a blessing or a curse depending on who consumes it. Let's look at what we've seen the goo do so far. The first appearance was back in part 2, Love's Slimy Embrace. It basically makes Derek's tiny octopus friend, Slimy, grow into a massive octopus in basically an instant. I guess the octopus deserved to be larger? I don't know, I don't really know what to make of this. Next, we see the trogs pour the goo into Lucy's headless corpse. This one is pretty interesting because it most lines up with the whole what you deserve concept. Lucy's dying act was to sacrifice himself for Bean, which actually got him sent to heaven. The goo ends up giving Lucy a slight demon upgrade, granting him wings. This is something we actually saw back in part 2 as well, but granted by the demon Asmodeum, and later taken away when he escapes hell. I expect the idea here is that Lucy actually did deserve his wings because of his noble sacrifice, and the goo granted them to him. Then we of course see Levo drink the goo, which promptly turns him into a trog, revealing that the trogs and elves are one and the same. Something I was correct about in my Mop Girl video, just saying. But the fact that the goo turns elves to trogs does sort of throw a wrench in the speculation, because honestly, I'm not exactly sure why the elves deserve to be trogs, or is it just Levo that deserved to be a trog? Is it possible that the goo wouldn't actually turn every elf into a trog? We know Levo has been trying to learn about the nature of the goo his entire life, which led him to the mystery of the elven throne below Dreamland Castle. Is it possible that the goo simply granted him the knowledge that the elves and trogs are one and the same? I initially predicted that the elves and trogs were a split evolutionary line, the trogs developing these features by spending their time underground. Was Levo himself turning into a trog just a quick way for the goo to grant him this knowledge? Or was every trog previously an elf that was turned into a trog by the goo? Or were their ancestors elves who were then turned into trogs by the goo, and these trogs are just the descendants of those other trogs/elves? Lots of mysteries here. And lastly, Bean tastes the goo, which leads to some wild dream antics where she meets Bad Bean, her evil doppelganger that lives in her head. She then teaches Bean to use her destructive powers, tricks her into killing herself in her dream, and then replaces her briefly. So the question here is, what did the goo exactly grant Bean that she deserved? Was it mastery over her abilities? Or it might be simpler. Maybe this just granted her a better understanding of the nature of Dreamland. Bean had been incapable of catching up to her doppelganger in her dreams until she tried the goo, and I think that these evil doppelgangers will likely play a bigger role moving forward as we learn more about Dreamland and its relation to dreams themselves. We get a lot of hints about this from both Zog and Lucy, who seem to have both had experiences or knowledge involving dream doppelgangers. Or is it possible that Bean actually deserved to be replaced by a different version of herself because she was a bad leader? It's hard to say, but I think that the nature of the goo itself might be a slight misdirect, because ultimately people seem to think that the goo will grant people what they want. At least Levo did, because we have to ask ourselves, why do Dagmar, Freckles, Cloyd, and Becky want the goo? Because theoretically, if the goo gives them what they deserve, they're going to be in for disappointment, right? Unless they have a skewed understanding of what they deserve, which a lot of villains do. So let's talk about who Freckles might actually be and why he seems to be in league with Dagmar. I have a few ideas myself, and I've seen a lot of ideas thrown around in my comment section, but the more I think about it, the more I think I'm on board with a specific answer. I think. Let's run them down. The first thought I had, and most common theory I've seen, is that Freckles is King Yogg, Zog's allegedly dead brother. And while this was my first thought, I am having a bit of a hard time seeing how this lines up, though I do think it's still possible. And honestly, the more I wrote this, the more I kind of convinced myself it's more possible. When Freckles walks Zog through his repressed dream memories, he does fixate on a couple of memories involving Yogg, particularly aimed at Zog's insecurities in relation to Yogg. The first shows how people cared much more for Yogg's safety as the heir to Dreamland than they did for Zog.
Oh, guess they only care about the air, not the spare.
And the second shows how Yogg and Zog's father loved Yogg, but saw Zog as a disappointment.
Yogg, you're perfect. Zog, try not to disappoint me this time.
I think it's definitely possible that there is some connection to Yogg here, which I think also begs the question of motivation. Why would Yogg be seeking the goo? And more importantly, why would Yogg have this disdain for his brother Zog? In the dream memories, they're really close pals, and Yogg seems to express pity towards his father's mistreatment of Zog. So why would Freckles/Yogg have it out for Zog now? Okay, bear with me while I go down this hypothetical path. We know Yogg was poisoned. We actually see it happen in a flashback back in Part 1, Episode 10. Zog was next to him when he died, so I don't think there's going to be a reveal that he actually never died, though I guess that's definitely not impossible. There's magic after all. But we have also seen many characters escape death in this series, finding their ways back from heaven and hell alike. But there is a difference. When a soul escapes heaven or hell, it seems to require a body to be inserted into. We see this with Elfo in Part 2 and Lucy in Part 4. Is it possible that Yog's soul returned from heaven or hell, but without his body accessible, needed to be inserted into this puppet? Additionally, if Yog doesn't know who actually poisoned him, I think Zog is actually a pretty logical conclusion for Yog to make. He was jealous of Yog and was the next in line after Yog. So if Yog believes that Zog poisoned him, this could explain a lot of his actions in Part 4. He might believe that finding the magic goo could either restore his actual body and grant him the throne as he feels he deserves as the rightful heir to Dreamland. It could also explain why through Zog's dreams, Freckles was looking for repressed memories relating to his relationship with Yog. Was he looking for the conclusive answer to whether or not Zog murdered him? It's a possibility. And the more I talked through it, the more I thought, wow, this kind of makes sense. The one thing that kind of throws a wrench in this is the Dreamland curse, which allegedly will be lifted when Zog's reign ends, as he is the final Og. The problem here is that if Freckles is Yog, that means the line of Ogs won't actually be over, and we know that Freckles knows this about the curse.
Once the royal Og line reaches its end and the curse is broken, whoever controls the throne controls the special stuff.
Unless, of course, there's more to the nature of the curse that makes this make sense that Freckles/Yog understands and we don't. Who knows? I've seen other people speculate that maybe Freckles is one of the dream doppelgangers in the puppet's body, perhaps Yog or even Zog's own doppelganger. And I think we'll have to learn more about these dream duplicates to know this for sure, but I think if it was evil Yog, this would still maintain all of the previous motivations I listed, and maybe by escaping from the dream/mirror world, evil Yog had to be inserted into this puppet? Just spitballing here. That being said, I think there are a few things that make me think there is another possibility, and this is where I might have landed speculation-wise. I think Freckles might be Dagmar and Zog's secret son. Now, this might sound far-fetched, but hear me out. There are some very curious hints that point to this idea. For one, the very first real scene with Freckles is riddled with them. I think it's pretty clear that the woman who sold Freckles to Zog is actually Dagmar. I know there is some speculation about who else she might be, but she looks just like Dagmar minus the lipstick, even down to the single beauty mark on her cheek. And Dagmar says something very interesting about Freckles in the shops.
He's a very naughty boy, but he's my favorite. He's practically my son.
Okay, that's pretty blatant. And on top of this, there's a sign in the store that says, "Replace your child." Part 4 also has Zog literally refer to Freckles as his son on 2 different occasions.
My kids! Bean! Derek! Do I got any others? No, that's it. Wow, Freckles.
And what exactly are we hunting for, your impulsiveness?
My 3 sons of bitches.
Granted, I know Zog doesn't really know if Freckles is his actual son, but this show seems to have a lot of these little dialogue and visual hints sprinkled throughout, so I think it would be weird if these actually just meant nothing. And I know he's just a puppet, but Freckles' outfit color palette matches Zog's, and his hair sticks out in the same way, which also was the case for Jasper, another of Zog's secret sons.
Look at him. Starting at the top. Spiky red hair.
But how would this even work? How did Dagmar hide a pregnancy from Zog? Well, what if Freckles is actually Bean's twin brother? We don't really know much about the actual birth of Bean, but Dagmar is clearly a master manipulator and definitely had allies during her time in Dreamland, including seemingly Oddval, and Bunty, who probably would have been the one delivering the babies. I definitely don't think it's impossible that when she gave birth to twins, one was hidden away. Why, you ask? I expect as a failsafe. Dagmar clearly has plans for Bean in regards to the ancient Maruvian prophecy, which seems to be her main priority. But if Dagmar were to keep Zog's true heir to the throne of Dreamland a secret, that would definitely give her a potential trump card in the Game of Thrones playing out here. I also think it's worth pointing out that Freckles and Bean are 2 of the only characters with prominent freckles in the show. Freckles has 2 on each cheek and Bean has 3. Granted, we know that Freckles is just a puppet, but we actually also see a Bean puppet back at the the dummy shop in part 3. I wonder if this will come into play later. Maybe Dagmar is going to insert Bad Bean's soul into this puppet? A whole army of creepy puppets. On top of that, Miri tells Bean back in part 2 that they refer to her as Freckles behind her back.
We call her Freckles behind her back.
Kind of a weird coincidence, right? I think this idea definitely needs more details to be fleshed out fully in order to fully make sense, but I just can't write off the initial introduction of Freckles. Dagmar and Zog both refer to him as their son. That's pretty blatant, right? And if this is the case, it's hard to know how much Dagmar has manipulated Freckles since her return, or where he even was while she was in statue form. But I expect that he's helping her so that he can eventually sit on the throne. After all, he did literally try to kill Zog and put his other male children in direct danger. Honestly, after running down both of these theories, I have a hard time choosing. I think they both have some pretty good evidence supported by the history and lore of Dreamland, and this was a lot of fun to write about. There are so many more things I want to speculate about with this show. I thought this video was actually going to touch on tons more, but there was just so much to talk about as is. And I was planning on this being my only theory video this year, but I actually think I want to make one more about the nature of Bean's abilities and how they work, because I think I've actually got a pretty good grasp on those now. So let me know if you want to see that in the comments. But what do you think? Do any of these theories make sense to you? Am I completely off base with all of them? I'm not as convinced as I was with my Mop Girl theory, but talking through them might inspire you to find the correct answer yourselves. So comment below and give me your own ideas. All right, peace.
Johnny! Two cellos!